So Christine Price is a PhD. She has a doctorate in natural medicine and a master's degree in psychology. She is the author of Four Bodies, Four Medicines, a quantum primer for change, and also 10 ways to balance your brain chemistry. That's now in its fourth edition. So cool. Christine facilitates or she trains facilitators actually and practitioners in holistic modalities, including quantum wholeness meditation and 0 point meridian technique. You've been hearing about some of these things, both of which have been accredited internationally, which is awesome. Christine's life journey is fascinating. She has gone through challenges that could only be resolved through ego work. And in her studies, she found that personality disorders like addictions are on a continuum. So real recovery takes one on a journey of inner change, and the change can be summed up as a change in the ego structure. The spiritual solution may be the only one that can actually resolve what the mental health field has either missed or avoided. And when we shift our ego structure, it improves our relationships with ourselves and others. This is the glory, her beautiful, magnificent elixir of life of what she brings forward. So as a student and a teacher of A Course in Miracles, a practice meditator and 12-step follower, Christine continues to find massively effective solutions well beyond formal training in psychology. And the beauty of it is she brings it to you.
Thank you, Bridget. And I love the segue of the story, because that's what we're talking about here. And I want to let you know that in my work with Bridget, what I found is that I kept telling my old story as memoir. And so she works with people who do memoir. And there's such a journey to evolving in that process as you start to get your story out. And there was a point in time where I realized that I was writing it like fiction. And I use that word, but later Bridget referred to it as fiction, and I almost corrected her, and then I didn't. Because I thought, what if I didn't have to be defined by something that seemed so real and permeating? What if I could live my life with a little bit of distance from my story and actually call it fiction? And then I rewrote a scene because it worked better. And that book literally became fiction after that. I don't know if you know that, like full on fiction after that. And it freed me. It freed me because it's like I didn't have to remember the detail of my past anymore. I was free to recreate it. Like I could tell that story and edit, and I could, and I could actually, I have the thing is, if you really do something profound in my life, and it doesn't have to be good, but if you have a good story, you made my book. And then there's people in my life that I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to edit them out. Can you do that? And it's really, I mean, like, as you tell this story, it's like, that just, it didn't make the book. And you can just walk on and move on. And it's so empowering. And so a lot of that happened at the same time I started delving into ego work and starting to look at that. And so here we are. We're going to delve into that. Are you ready? Who's ready? This is a heavy topic that I've worked with in as compassionate a way as possible. And I tell you because Bridget was working with me at a time that I was living with a narcissist, and I was shrinking by, I wouldn't say by day, but definitely by holiday. I had one year where I had the most epically bad holidays, and they were specific. It was Valentine's Day, Mother's Day, and my birthday. And I had someone say to me, oh my gosh, what does that mean? She said, and I think it was a she coach. I have to remember who, but they said, do you see the relationships in that? As we talk about relationships today, relationship in a romantic, Valentine's kind of manner, relationship as a mother with my children, and relationship with myself as my birthday. And I'm going to tell you at the end of this presentation, this one thing, and I went and picked it up from the drawer in my office that changed it all, that changed every holiday. Okay, are you ready to find out what that was? because you've never heard of it before, I can promise you. Okay, here we go. Here's the topic. Breaking down personality disorders into manageable parts. And any of you who've heard of parts therapy, this is another fabulous tool. And I don't get into that today, but there is something to the parts. Okay. So here's my questions for you. We talked yesterday about fulfillment being at which frequency? Anybody? 500. So that's, and that's I think it's a pretty solid place to be. When you get to a 500 frequency, you're going to have a level of fulfillment. And now we're going to talk about what is that 500 frequency solution for better relationships, and what one thing can improve all relationships, everyone, even the toughest one. Okay. And that's where we're headed today. All right. So first I'm going to quote Eckhart Tolle from The Power of Now, A Guide to Spiritual Enlightenment, which is a book I was listening to around that time. The pain body. And I started to get in touch with like, oh my gosh, this thing called the pain body. Wow. Could that be like something other than just like me? The pain body, which is the dark shadow cast by the ego, is actually afraid of the light of your consciousness. It's afraid of being found out. Its survival depends on your unconscious identification with it, as well as on your unconscious fear of facing the pain that lives in you. Okay, one thing I will tell you, I was in private practice. I had it wasn't visible because I didn't want to offend, but an invisible poster that says, I don't accept victims as clients. Okay. I did not want to work with victims. I will tell you that off, right? You're like, that was not something I wanted to deal with. Okay. I didn't mind bullies. I was willing to take on a bully, but not a victim. The enigma of complex ego structures. Where do personality disorders come from? Now we're going to do a quick overview of this. I do have a full masterclass series on it if you want to go deeper. But can they be changed? And that's like things like narcissism, which we'll get into more. What makes them worse? What improves them? Are there clinical approaches that are effective? And what else is there? Okay, that's where we're heading for today. Now, this is straight out of deep dive psychology. So this is master's level, doctorate level psychology stuff. All right. So if you take personality disorders, they put them into 3 clusters. I don't attempt to deal with cluster A. I'll say that's a whole nother thing I'm not stepped into. It is definitely needs to be managed by medication and by clinicians. We'll just say that. But cluster B and cluster C, I feel like I would be remiss if I did not help teach the world what I know about these. That's why I'm doing this. So I will tell you just a quick story. I actually shared this presentation, probably one of the most honorable things I did last year was be invited. Well, actually, I invited myself, I have to say, but I convinced the psychology teacher to let me come up in front of the psychology class in the high school at my daughter's high school. My sweet little 16-year-old was in that room. And this is the reason why I do this. She has friends who've already been diagnosed borderline personality disorder. She is their life coach. Okay. She grew up with a mommy who was learning all of this. And she learned about emotional intelligence at the age of 3 and has continued to learn about inner work, about consciousness, about all these things. And she is sought after, whether she likes it or not. And so she attracts very complex personalities into her life. And they sit in the back seat of my car and discuss the the therapist, view of them and how they're trying to navigate this. And I realized these teenagers need more information, and these teachers that teach them need to be more equipped. My daughter had to basically put her friends back together after a class in her health class on, I think it was a health class on relationships. It was maybe a relationships class where they talked about the impossibility of narcissism and a few other different personality disorders were thrown out there. And she had friends who they knew that their father was a narcissist. And she had friends who had already been diagnosed borderline, and the teacher did not consider the real lives of these students when she did this. She spoke as if these are all the monsters that live far, far away. Not like they're in your own home. And they're in your own home. They're not only in your own home, they're in your own head. And this is a passion and a mission of mine to equip people with understanding and to really solve this, okay, in a way that it doesn't become this impossible shadow to face. All right. So this is why we're doing this. And this is where I come from, the compassion I do. So I'm going to start with the antisocial. And isn't this perfect that Bridget is on here talking about a daughter of a sociopath? And how does she deal with that? That is in her morphogenetic field, right? A borderline, that's another one. The histrionic doesn't get enough attention. Oh my gosh, I just did a play on that. Okay, if you understand what the histrionic is, that was really funny. I just realized the histrionic by nature has extreme needs for attention. Okay, narcissists get a ton of attention. All right, cluster C is the avoidant, the dependent, and the obsessive compulsive, and those are not addressed. So if you're curious about these, I'm not going to be able to delve into all the details about them, but I am going to touch on a few. And it's so funny that, okay, a histrionic is an amazing person. They are fun. They're super entertaining. They're you can see it in me a little bit, right? And so I've had to acknowledge, like, okay, I have a little bit of that. I also have a little bit of narcissism. And to know that, yes, these are parts of who you are, and then figure out, how do I work with that? So instead of me avoiding the limelight, I realized, okay, if I actually take this and I develop it, I can do it in a way that's bolder and that's maybe more entertaining and that might have, a reach that I wouldn't if I just stayed small. The small personalities are also ego structures, and they are in the avoidant and the dependent. And so that's what's so important to know, is that there's an anxious, fearful cluster. And if you're caught in that, you will stay in a loop in life. And it's where you get things like social phobia, anxiety disorders. The obsessive compulsive personality disorder is the rabbit in Winnie the Pooh. Okay. So rabbit is like constantly like, it's hard to live with them. They're on your case. They're overbearing. They're difficult to please. And so people, I think if you were to look at percentages, I'm willing to bet everybody has an OCPD in their life. They just don't know that's a name. And then it's really common. The cluster C is really common. And so we see it even more since quarantine, since, this new Gen Z or whatever, they like their bubbles. and, I have to say, I had a recent interaction with someone. They worked for me for a little while until I offered to go to their house to bring in the computer so they could work from home. She brought the computer to my doorstep and left it and texted me, saying, "I quit. You just violated my boundaries." Okay. So there's that. And I don't understand some people, but it helps if we understand them. And so that's part of this. Okay. So I'm going to keep going and just help you understand that this whole list of things are things that are in our lives all the time, and they create big problems. So big problems. Families and relationships are challenging, even impossible, when you get to the point of an extreme personality. Clinical conditions, so like depression, anxiety, plus the personality disorder equals gas plus fire. The risk for suicide increases. High correlation with substance abuse and addictions. Yeah, that was on the list right before that. Did you see every one of them? If you want to make something worse, add some alcohol or substances to it. Or, even like it doesn't have to be substance, get, into a sexual, behavior that's out of balance. So, okay. Correlations between suicide and personality disorders. Okay, did you guys know there was this thing called a psychological autopsy? Why do we not hear about that more often? A psychological autopsy. What that means is you take someone who's committed suicide or overdosed and you look back, like, what led to this? So, follow back research has found that suicide occurs in up to 10% of borderline personality disorders. By and large, so this basically 10% of suicides are, no, wait, let me think if I flip that. I'll keep going. By and large, suicides in borderline personality occur later in the course of the illness and follow long courses of unsuccessful treatment. Okay, so I'm gonna clarify. 10% of borderlines are committing suicide. Okay. Psychological autopsy methods, which involve postmortem interviews with families, have examined the frequency of personality disorder diagnoses in death by suicide. Among those cases, there's about half of them that are under the age of 35, with borderline being the most common category. So half of the suicides, when they do this, you can see a personality disorder in it. And most of those are borderline personality disorder. Okay. So if anybody knows a borderline, they're tough. In the clinical field, they're actually they make up a huge portion of, really, like, there are a lot of repeat customers. They stay in therapy a really long time. Okay. And they're not really getting treatment as a solution orientation. It's actually part of their disorder to keep doing therapy. And I think it's important to know that. So really, we're doing a disservice to keep working with the borderlines if it doesn't change the personality disorder. Okay, so what will happen sometimes is that you'll try to set a boundary with a borderline. You'll say, I'm just not okay with this going in these circles. And they will actually threaten, well, okay, then I'll just, I've got another way out of this, my pills are at home, whatever. And they'll threaten. So they threaten suicide a lot. They don't always complete suicide, because the threat of suicide is actually one of the mechanisms of the disorder. Okay. If anybody can relate to that, it's heavy. It's hard to be in a relationship with that. You don't know what to do. Okay. What worsens ego structures? Enabling. So that's what I'm trying to say is, in the therapy world, there is a certain amount of enabling going on to say, all right, well, then I'll just keep working with you. But it doesn't really solve the problem. Substance abuse definitely makes it worse. Other addictive behaviors, yes. A self-focus rather than a service focus. A lack of empathy. A lack of boundaries. Unchecked emotions and behaviors. A lack of personal accountability or responsibility. That's probably like one of the top things. Oh, I have to read. Okay, if you have the workbook, let me read. This was from Brie Melanson. I just learned about her from the Next Level Soul podcast. And she said, you can't take your ego with you when you expand. Don't you love that? Yeah, you can expand. And so if you're in your workbook, this is the list. And so just note the ones that jump out at you, because these are all tricky things in relationships, aren't they? Boundaries, like looking at, like, how much do I focus on me? How much do they focus on them? How empathetic am I? And here's a challenging thing, is that if you're an empath by nature, it's very common that you'll attract someone who's very self-oriented. Does anybody experience that? Right? Okay. So that's tricky. But the lack of personal accountability and responsibility is a really big factor. A lack of a moral compass or character education. And then having the stage and getting attention. That's the one that that I have, I shouldn't beat on anybody, but I couldn't resist posting a picture of the Kardashians when I did this in the master class. So if you look at an entire family system where it's so superficial, I'm guessing, I would assume, and that the lack of moral compass, I mean, I didn't know the history and I don't know if I want to share it, but like, wow, I didn't know how they got famous. And there was a lack of moral compass there in the part of a mother and a daughter. So, and it's really sad that it worked in the realms of fame, but does it work? You know, is there a sense of like true function, right? Or is it dysfunction? Is it a family dynamic that allows for dysfunction? So those are good examples, but you know, of bad examples, I guess. Okay, so let's talk about the victim. As I said, that I struggled with that victim model. So I have this in our training with liberation training and the frequency school. So we have three different arenas here. We have the victim, the villain, and the vindicator. And this does come from Karpman's drama triangle is where this comes from. Okay. So this is, he calls it the hero, the victim, and the perpetrator, I believe. So if you think about this, and I'm going to pause and just check in with the room for a minute. I want to see who relates to being a hero. Just put hero. And actually, I didn't introduce Bridget as being a leader of the She-Rose world. And heroes, we want heroes. Like, we love heroes, right? Heroes are like what give us hope. They elevate us. They reach out and, you know, and if we're willing to reach for that. I mean, if you think about any of those roles, which role would you want to be in the story? But think about every story. And Bridget asked, you know, have you ever really loved a movie where there was no conflict, where there was like, and she could have said, have you ever loved a story where there's like no hero? Well, no, we're not going to love a story without a hero. Well, what allows a hero to have a role? Well, you've got to have a victim for sure. And so if that hero can help save that victim, then there's a good story to some extent, but it gets even better if there's a bad guy. And if that bad guy can help make that story like really intense, like come at odds with the hero. And it's like, then it's a battle and it's like, who's going to really save who's going to really win in the end, right? Then it's really good. So that is the structure of every story. Think about how that structure works in your life. Okay, think about how that structure works in every really good movie out there. I love spy movies, especially with female protagonists. I'm going to say that is my favorite. And so this is like my stuff. I'm like, I want to be. And it is, and that's so funny. Harley actually acknowledged, she took responsibility for her victim tendencies. Thank you, Harley. I am a hero with more of a villain shadow who refused to accept the victim, right? And so I was just in constant battle. Think about that. If you don't have a victim to save and you've just kind of like got this fight for who gets to win, that is the battle that goes inside that ego mind. So in every case in that story, whoever you dialogue or dyad with, you're going to have a battle. You're going to have conflict. Okay. Whether it's that victim who's being persecuted by that bully, or, you know, you're being saved, but you've got to remain a victim so that hero can have a good story. You know, think about it. Every one of those, whatever we're living in our own head, our own story, that's what it is. It's that dynamic. So ascending from a victim, I like that. I like that. What if, okay, so I'm going to present this. So if you want to get out of that story, what are your options to get out of the story, to leave that conflict? So and this is where I think some people get suicidal. If you live inside that kind of a conflict, that is the ego's way. That's the ego's temptation of like, we can just end it. But we can end the story. Yes, the end. There we go. See, it was that easy. That's the voice you're going to hear. What if instead we were all three? So I could not heal until I accepted I'm a victim. I am also a victim. I knew I was polarized. I knew I had a shadow, and I was doing the shadow work, and I wanted the hero to win. So I was prepared to get rid of the shadow. We actually had a conversation one day. We had that conversation in the room of a man who was completely connected to source. And I trusted him as completely connected to source to give me an answer on what to do with my shadow. And I took my shadow issue to him and I said, could we destroy this? Could we disintegrate this shadow within me? And he checked in with source and he said, we could, but there is a better way. Isn't that interesting to think about? So then he left me to figure out the better way. And this is what I came up with. The better way. What improves ego structures? So what I'd figured out is that this is a part. I didn't want to claim it, but I knew I wanted to be apart from that part. Family dynamics that operate on personal responsibility, boundaries, and emotional intelligence, those work. Okay. Recovery works. Boundaries with legal and potentially addictive behaviors works to say that's enough of that. Service works. Empathy is a good idea. We're in the workbook again if you want to write some down. Boundaries are a good idea. Emotional intelligence is a good idea. Personal accountability or responsibility, also a good idea. Moral guidance and character education. Personal awareness and consciousness with that big C, consciousness. Okay, so this is about the time as I was going through this process that I was also exploring spiritual paths that were new to me. And I'm going to get back to that. I've always been a fan of Mom. Who put Mom in the chat if you've seen episodes of Mom, and if, especially the last few seasons, if any of you watch, there's 7 seasons of Mom. You will watch Bonnie as a true, like, antisocial personality disorder, fully narcissistic, and like just not very nice, very self-oriented, little histrionic as well. Okay. In the first few seasons, that's who she is. When you watch this and it goes and it takes place over years and it builds her character around her relationships, she becomes more empathetic, more personally responsible, more like she falls in love with a guy in a wheelchair, right? And she loves him and she cares for him. And she even lets him drink. That would have been my line. Nope, I'm in recovery. You do not bring that in my house. She was empathetic. She was like, she took care of people. She sponsored. She felt feelings by the end of those seasons. It works. They're very true to life. They show AA in every episode and they don't make fun of it. They make it real. Okay. Just so you know, looking at addiction, it's on a continuum. And this continuum is what I propose is also part of personality disorders. So I share a few of these examples. You've got mood, temperament, personality. And I don't know if it's in here. There is a quick video, and we'll share it in the email, of Joe Dispenza explaining this. And he talks about, like, if you want to really get stuck, on, like, you can share that you have a bad mood, right? And that lasts a few days, maybe a week or 2. But if it lasts more than that, it becomes a temperament. Like, we've got this winter temperament. Like we've got SAD, seasonal affective disorder, and this is our temperament all through the winter. Okay, that's a temperament. But when it starts to last 2 years, then we call it dysthymic depression, or a pervasive or persistent depressive disorder, PDD. And that's when it becomes a personality. So it's like it has gotten to the point where it's like who you are. Now you're an Eeyore, not a rabbit. Okay. So that's pretty much how this works. And you can kind of look at the same idea with borderline. But that's, I think, important for us to look at is to take full responsibility doesn't mean we need a diagnosis. But it's important to look at, are we moody? Are we temperamental? Is this becoming a personality? Right? Okay. Emotional solution. So this is the one clinical thing that I can see has potential. So the idea with emotional dysregulation, they have started to, they gave it a name, accompanied by a lack of control over impulses, makes patients more likely to turn to suicidal actions. And the frequency of suicide attempts is strongly related to these traits. So when you don't manage your emotions, when you get hijacked and you have impulse issues, then you go out and you do something stupid. Those are very specific criteria for borderline. Okay. That's a big part of that. Thus, all methods of psychotherapy attempt to teach patients to stand outside of their emotions. And we heard that term pain body. Wasn't that interesting? To self-reflect before acting on them and to develop a better understanding of interpersonal conflict. The question is, how do you do that? That is easier said than done. All right. But that is the solution in a nutshell. The whole solution is what I would suggest is an integrative mental health. More complete approach. It looks at a multifaceted picture of each individual, and each of those disorders, you know, the personality disorders, would have a different set of solutions. Okay. But they would all involve physical, mental, emotional, spiritual avenues. And I'm going to lean more towards the spiritual than the physical. There really isn't a medication for this. Okay. So this is what I present as a solution. It's and I would say if you're dealing with something at this level, it is a 4-month program at least. And the phases of this are moving people through the frequency model and frequency school, liberation training, quantum wholeness meditation, and then the 0-point meridian practice, becoming very equipped with that. Can you see? And I'll kind of walk through it, but you're going to see how these all kind of fit in this solution. So liberation training is really, we're using what's called the love solve method in that. And so that's a development of awareness of emotion, deep awareness of emotion, and movement through the emotion so you don't get stuck in it. I will say that there's a borderline black hole. Okay. I should not laugh about this. It is very real. So I actually went through several years of borderline personality disorder in this marriage to a narcissist. I did not know that I was a victim. Okay. So I talked about like, I am not a victim. No, that is not me. I don't want to work with victims. It just took being married to a narcissist, and then I was. And if you've been with one, that is not funny. Okay. So the idea with the victim going into a deep, deep, deep hole is the deeper you go, it's like, who loves me enough? And I want you to sit with this, to come with me into this hole. Who loves me enough to go into the depths of my pain with me? This is why therapy can be enabling. Okay. Because if you as a clinic, you know, even as a life coach, get caught in that, you're actually reinforcing this dysfunction. So I remember that epic Valentine's Day. And what it was is that I started into a dark hole. And the way that my spouse could have really shown love to me that day was to just go there with me. And all I was looking for was some validation and an emotional connection in my hole, in my dark hole. And he got mad at me. He's like, "You're ruining Valentine's Day." He left me in a parking lot and went to the movie by himself. So I was left there in that car in the dark, in my own dark hole. And I had some choices with that. I realized that if I didn't want to be in the dark hole alone and nobody would join me in that dark hole, maybe I should consider a couple other options. Okay. So my couple of the other options looking at that now today, and you could share if you have one of your own, would be a spiritual solution to join me in that dark hole. Okay. That's big. Or to find a way out of it myself. That's personal responsibility. That was my first inkling of my way out. Okay. But the deep dark hole of that, borderline scenario requires personal work to pull out of it. And if you stay stuck in the emotions, that's not what we want. We want to move you through it. And so there's a processing that I help people with. And this is, if you remember the frequency levels, right? We had anger is actually the way out, which is really interesting. Like anger is a catalyst out of that hole. This is your dark hole. It's the dark well. Isn't that interesting to look at? What's at the bottom of the dark hole? It's shame. I would have to say that it's also self-loathing. Okay, so maybe the deep dark hole for that borderline is the self-loathing. And then there's anxiety towards the top, but this is where I think the deep and the depth of that personality disorder is more in that shame arena. And pain, I would put pain in there too. Okay, so this is part of our love self model, and you go through the dark work until it's out of the well, and then you get to experience an empty well. And for some people, that is so uncomfortable. Like, wait, where's my friendly emotions? They're really not friendly. They're just not there anymore. And if you've identified yourself around these emotions on the left, it becomes an identity crisis, right? If you have lived, and we see that anxiety is, and there's an entire cluster of personality disorders around anxieties. If that is your identity and you let go of it, who are you? So it's a very important place to be in that nothingness. And then we start to fill it with the positives. So the nothingness is what I would say would be one of the most important parts of the process. So dialectical behavioral therapy is one of the, I would say, better types of approaches to this. It's actually designed for the one thing they found is helpful with borderline, emotional regulation and mindfulness training. And so it involves the self-awareness, the present moment, rather than the past or the future, because future is where anxiety comes from, right? Past is where the shame comes from. Increase the gap between stimulus and response. Okay, I want to know who does yoga in here. Put yoga in the chat if you do yoga. Would you know that yoga is one of the most effective ways to get out of your head? Isn't that interesting? To get out of your ego, to get out of that war that's going on. I'm curious if anybody's found that. If you can go get on a mat and shut your brain off and move your body in ways that I think are truly like, there's a technology to it in the Eastern world. Like they're sometimes breaking that down and understanding it better now. But that's where I learned about the gap between stimulus and response is from Baron Baptiste, who's a fabulous yoga instructor. And he talks about how yoga does that for you. So stimulus is, I get, my car gets crashed. Like I hit, and I knew it was my fault because I was like trying to go fast. I was trying to go around something and the car was turning. And it was a bad deal. So it wasn't even, I wasn't a victim in it really, but it kind of was. And then what? Do I go all like upside down and not follow through with what I agreed to, that I committed to be to, So when we increase that gap, it's like we have something happen that could hijack us. And instead of being hijacked, we stay present enough to go forward into that next choice, into that next step. So, so it involves being fully present as well. Embodied, which means you're in your body. And if you can get to the level of nervous system regulation, you guys have to find stay tuned for Samantha Akers, because she's the one who got me to that level. And she has a story, and she's on here in a couple hours. Yes, in 1 hour, a little over an hour. She finishes off the day. And this woman is my Dharma teacher. This woman is my Buddhist coach. And she will explain, sometimes she'll explain the nervous system, but I will explain that she's the one who got me in my body. And she has a story of how hard that was for her as a victim of chronic pain and to become conscious. Okay. Quantum wholeness meditation is something that you will learn is a practice for the Eastern mind and Christian heart, part of the liberation training. And essentially, this is what I teach, is I teach the quantum rather than mental medicine, because zero is not cognitive behavioral therapy. Okay. Zero is not, there's not somebody in front of the room teaching you anything. Zero, zero. And there is something about that that quiets the ego mind. So when you want out of the story, it is not an ending. It's a pause. It's just a blank page. You continue the book. You just have a few blank pages in it. And in those blank pages, there's nothing to do. There's nothing to read. There's no one to save. There's no persecutors. Okay. There's silence. Silence is indivisible. Zero is indivisible. Think about that. 0 times 0 is 0. 0 divided by 0 is 0. 0 minus 0. 0 plus 0. You get it? Like, it's always 0. The spirit is indivisible. Consciousness is indivisible. So quantum wholeness meditation, that's where we teach this power of the zero. And 0 point meridian is also accesses this place of healing. And so we talked about that yesterday. And so make sure to watch the video if you missed that one. All right. So some of what I've learned this comes from Dr. Frank Kinslow. And he explains that thoughts and emotions are mental forms. Pure awareness has no form. Because pure awareness is formless, it cannot be recognized by your mind. No matter how hard you try, you won't be able to understand awareness or consciousness. Neither will you be able to control or manipulate it. It doesn't exist as a thing. We must come to know this no thing more intimately than we know our own mind. You cannot figure out the drama triangle. You can't figure it out. There's no solution. It just goes in a triangle over and over. Sometimes you play one role. Sometimes you play another role, right? Have you recognized that? When I did my first 4-step inventory is when I found my drama triangle. So I had an entire era of my life as a victim. I had an entire era of my life as a villain. And then I was in the era of my life as a vindicator as I was doing my inventory. So I could see it. I didn't know if I wanted to be it. All right. Being at zero. This is the book that I've written with my soulmate, Todd, and we're going to talk a little bit more about it tomorrow. But back to the, sorry, let me just spend one more minute on it. Thank you. Oh my gosh, you just popped that up there. Look at, I have such great help. So here's our people. Okay, I want to celebrate them. So Kathy Truman, who is going to speak tomorrow, has a chapter in this book. Cherie Burton did our summit. So the second summit I did in 2022 was so epic. And these are some of the speakers at it. Carrie Skrdla, I pulled her chapter in and it's great. It's about her trip to Barbados. And Vinnie Tolman has a section in there. And then Annie, who was working with me last year, Jennifer, she's a great life coach, intuitive. Todd's in there. Joanne has a chapter in there, and Coley Perkins from yesterday. So yeah, so this is the crazy thing. And I think I've mentioned this to Bridget, but I made a book that was half memoir and half anthology. I think I'm the first one to do it. I don't know if anybody else has done one. So basically it's a memoir with anthology chapters intertwined. And so it takes you on this journey while it also introduces you to these other like great thought leaders and spiritual contributors. So it's pretty fun. So grab a copy if you're interested. And we are going to give one away as well today. Okay. Now I'll go into this. The solution, we want to measure it. And there is not a lot out there that will measure ego structure. There's something called the MMPI. Anybody heard of the MMPI? So I laugh because it's 500 and some questions. It takes like 45 minutes to take it. I took it as a teenager. My parents did not know how to help me. And so I did 2 MMPIs. And because they were like looking at the stability of my personality in PMS. Okay. So it was like I had major cycle issues. Okay. And I took it one time when I was kind of functional. And then I took it another time when I was the week before my period, and it came out invalid. It's like they couldn't even like make sense of it. So yeah, I had an invalid personality. That is not a way to track change. I'll just tell you that. I came up with another one. It is a scale that has a score that tracks all of the cluster B and all the cluster C symptoms or traits. There are, I developed it in 2020, the year one of the Conscious Community College. And there's an average score of 34, which is actually, you could have a personality disorder with 34. But that's the average score I'm getting with people that are doing basic therapy and liberation training and things. So the correlations, and then you don't just take it alone, you get scored by significant others. And that's when it gets really interesting. So I'm going to get to that. Okay. This is an example. So this is a client who went through basically a 4-month program with her family. This is a key. This is, I think, how we solve this problem is we don't just take the person with the issues, because if you're in a family system, there's your drama triangle. You've got some, and this was a client who was the bully in her family. And so her younger sister was the victim and her parents were trying to be heroes. Okay. So there's their, they all needed to be part of the solution because they were all part of the problem. So they all came in, they did a full family program for 4 months. They rated her. So if you see this, the mother is rating the daughter who was sent to therapy for 2 years before that without the family. Okay. So for 2 years, she came to therapy and it didn't really solve the problem. Then the family came in with her. Mother rates her to 64. Dad rates her to 75, but she rates herself at a 74. And that's how I knew she was self-aware enough. She knew that she had a problem. She just didn't know how to fix it. So this is what changed. And within 3 months, you can see that goes down. And look at what happened is her mother and father are like, oh my gosh, she's so much better. 53 and 52. She's still rating herself a 65. Like, oh no, I got a long ways to go. And that's when I started working with her about incorporating the bully. Now she knew it was there. What do you do with it? And then she started to do the work of self-acceptance and accepting a path or a scenario where a lot of stuff came up for her. It was just part of her conscious curriculum at the time that needed to. And she was able to work through it and look at how that changed in 2 more months. Basically, she was down from 65 to 33. And her family all was pretty much on board, 39, 38, 33. Isn't that amazing? An entire year later, I said, please do this again. And she maintained, she had a little bit of a peak, but look at that, 32, 32, 39. Isn't that amazing? When I see these numbers, like I know we got her to an average functioning person by that. And she'd actually had the cops called on her. The family had to have her taken away in handcuffs. That's what it looked like in December 2020. So, okay. She stayed at home. The family worked with her. The family got better. All right. So that's what we do. And so these are the different levels of change, and we're getting you to this 500 frequency. And so it's a multi-layered solution. I'm going to give you the quick quantum solutions, where it says the 3 quantum solutions. Okay, I'm going to tell you about what was in the drawer. Remember I told you like epic bad birthday is what it was. Okay, so I woke up the morning of my birthday, the year after the bad Valentine's Day and the bad Mother's Day. And I realized my relationship with myself was a problem. And so I had gotten, okay, so these formulas, let me just come off and tell you a little bit about these. So I had worked with a man who had a He'd worked in the 80s in the biofeedback technology. So brand new technology in the 80s. He worked at a clinic that was actually resolving cancer. It was using Rife technology and frequency technology to heal people. He could see it going really south with the political agendas, and and there were, that was the era of like, who are the communists, okay? And so it was like so much persecution. And so he actually left America and did his entire practice in Europe. He was like done with that. So he comes back and actually returned to the US probably 30 years ago. And he was like he was actually building, it couldn't have been 30 years ago. It was more like 15 years ago. So he was in Europe for about probably 20 years. Anyway, so he's building a cabin up in the woods, and he was going to just live off grid and not, engage. And several of those doctors from that first clinic had already passed on to the other side, and he started to get messages. He started to get downloads. And he created a system of formulas based off of biofeedback technology. And so there's a lot to that, but the simplest form is it's information based. It's information. So this information will help correct your spine alignment, everything from that to reversing disease, to improving your cranial. It's like getting a craniosacral in a bottle. It's like you're getting a biofeedback session every time you take these drops. And so he had clients that were just like, we love this. And he had one that had done most of his program. And then she got to a point where she said, I've resolved so many health issues and emotional issues. I have a whole thing called a mood kit with the emotional side of it. And she said, I just don't know how to resolve these aspects of my ego. Like I go into victim mode and self-sabotage, and I just go in self-destruct. I get in my head. And she's like, can you do a formula for that? And he tried, and that's what was in my office. That was in my desk drawer. So that day I went and I got that formula and I started taking it. And within a few weeks, I was finally able to separate myself from the pain body. The pain body wanted to go in the deep, dark hole. I did not. So like, whatever that is, have fun. And it was like everything started to change in my relationships, in my headspace. And that's what I needed. And so I now have a private label. I feel very blessed to have received that from him. And Steve Fontaine is his name. Some people might actually recognize that. So that's the system that kind of helps create them. I actually have created one of my own, and it's called Mother's Hope. And it helps to balance the endorphins in the body. Okay, in the brain. All right, that's a whole nother thing. But the other thing, it takes a miracle, literally. So this, I would also kind of say, is a quantum solution. And it's working with A Course in Miracles. And so we do a study group every Wednesday at 4. And in that study group, we are addressing the ego in a way that shifts it from a spiritual perspective. And I'm actually looking at doing some of our research just on that itself, like how much are we shifting just doing that? But A Course in Miracles view of psychotherapy, you ready? The changes the ego seeks to make are not really changes. The healers, psychologists of the world may recognize the mind as a source of illness, but their error lies in the belief that the mind can cure itself. Yet must their cures remain temporary. Yeah. Okay. So the real solution, this is what we read at the end of our meetings. No one is healed alone. This is the joyous song salvation sings to all who hear its voice. Healing is holy. Nothing in the world is holier than helping one who asks for help. We have his word to guide us as we help our brothers. Where two have joined for healing, God is there. And he has guaranteed that he will hear and answer them in truth. Now, this is powerful. You ready for this one? This one still blows my mind. One holy, egoless therapist could heal the world without a word, merely by being there. Whew. Okay, there we go. I wrapped it up right on time. So there's so much to that. Okay, now as we dial that down, let's look at if there's one thing you could do, it helps to know what your frequency is. If you are still dealing with victim, if you understand that drama triangle, liberation training is a solution. It's powerful. If you are still trying to figure out how to get off the roller coaster, like you've had some breakthroughs, you've had some emotional shifts, but you go kind of around in circles, the best thing you could do is learn quantum wholeness meditation. And that's this part 2 of liberation training. And if you're like, okay, you're a solid meditator, you've got a lot of this figured out, except maybe this piece I'm talking about, like with the formulas, there is a way that we can actually address that. And so, I'm going to let Joanne put frequencyformulas.com up there. So that's my site. You can actually explore that if you want to, but that's might be too much of a leap without all the other elements. So we bring it all together in that 4-month program. So in the 4-month program, you get frequency school, liberation training, quantum wholeness meditation, you get frequency formulas, you also get to learn 0-point meridian for your like full-on use. Is anybody ready for that? I would love to work with you if you're ready for that. If you're like, this is the time, I'm ready, put ready in the chat, because it's time to like shift this, not just for you, but for your relationships. And Mike is here to set up my appointment calendar. We're going to keep Mike on. So do a direct message with Mike if you would like to have a conversation with me. He is my call setter from the Philippines. I would love to go to the Philippines and meet him. He said he was on here yesterday. He's like, this was the coolest thing I've ever done. And I just adore him. So he's also the connection I have to Amy Walker. So he understands a lot of the things that she does in business. And so it's very helpful. Thank you, Mike. And so this is his job, is to help set people up with phone calls with me so that we can go to the next level. And I would love for him to be able to do his job right now. So reach out and he will give you my calendar link. Okay. And we're going to introduce Andrea and Richard. Well, yes, Andrea and Richard Haynes. And we're going to get a feel for how this works with a couple to do a 4-month program. Okay. So they're going to talk about the couples model and how this can really create such consciousness for a couple.